So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm going today to talk about some challenges, perspectives, and potential opportunities related to the coexistence of the commercial fishing sector and offshore wind farms. So we all know that to help combat climate change and to meet ambitious renewable energy targets, we're experiencing a rapid expansion in offshore wind power globally. This map shows current or developing wind farm sites around the UK up to 2030, with expansion planned in the North, Irish and Celtic seas. But this development brings with it conflicting pressures in the use of marine space, which we know is called spatial squeeze. In an earlier project that was funded by the UK Energy Research Centre, we produced a database of published evidence regarding the environmental, biodiversity and socio-economic outcomes of offshore wind developments, both positive, negative and neutral. And from this we have produced the ORI's Open Access Evidence tool, which is available from the link or the QR code on the slide. And essentially this tool provides a portal to the most up-to-date summarised evidence from primary and grey literature, and it was designed to help regulators and industry to access and use this available evidence to help facilitate policy and planning decisions. What we found was that evidence reported in the primary and grey literature can be quite different, and also the database highlights there is a lack of recent evidence for the impacts of the offshore wind industry on commercial fishing. So previous studies looking at impacts on commercial fishing date back 10 or 20 years or so, but the number of wind turbines being deployed is increasing exponentially, and so potentially are the socio-economic consequences. We conducted an online survey and follow-up interviews to find out how fishermen operating in UK waters have been impacted by existing offshore wind farms and how they expect to be impacted by future planned developments. From 52 complete responses, the size of vessel represented ranged from 5 to 50 metres in length, represented 11 different mobile and static gear types, and 26 named target species as well as mixed species fisheries. And we had responses from all around the British Isles. The results from this work have been submitted as a research article and are currently in review. I'll just present an overview of results now. So the red circles on this map indicate for each wind farm currently operational or under construction, the number of survey respondents that said it had impacted their fishing activity. So all but 3 wind farms currently operational or under construction were cited as having some kind of impact. And the black triangles indicate the home ports of the respondents. There was no correlation between the date a wind farm was installed or the capacity and the number of times it was cited as having an impact on fishing. So in summary, the majority of the respondents did experience negative impacts due to offshore wind farms. Displacement was common, and this leads to several knock-on impacts, including spatial conflict with other fishers, negative impacts on catches and profitability, impacts on safety, and having to travel further to fish, which also has further implications for crew welfare, fuel costs, and also fishing on unfamiliar grounds. Compensation was a key topic. So 17 out of the 52 respondents had received compensation payments for energy companies for disruption during either surveys or construction, but most of these used static fishing gears and all but 1 were vessels under 15 metres in length. And some comments that were made reflected frustration in the amount of money received or the inequity of payments between individuals or fleet sectors, or just negative experiences during the process. And currently in the UK, there are guidelines for compensation provided to industry, but there's no legal regulation. We also found that the same concerns are raised now as 2 decades ago. In fact, all respondents expected to be impacted by future offshore wind developments through direct or indirect impacts. Many would expect to leave the fishing industry in future due to impacts from offshore wind combined with other spatial and legislative pressures. And although there are often no restrictions to fishing within UK wind farms, it's generally considered unsafe or unfeasible to fish. International fishers are also impacted, and the knock-on effects of displacement ripple up and down the coast and between different sizes of vessel, but this also is not accounted for in compensation. Some potential benefits were recognised by a handful of respondents, and these included opportunities for lobster fishing around turbine bases, biodiversity positive designs or environmental mitigation methods that could be used, compensation or community benefit schemes if applicable, and also potential future employment in other sectors. And also ecological outcomes were identified. So these included positive outcomes such as MPA and related spillover effects, although these effects are often inferred and we do require more empirical evidence for these. And some potential negative outcomes identified included habitat disturbance or disruption to spawning and larval transport, and also observed impacts on target species, such as effects on behaviour and migration or decreased catches, and these were attributed to electromagnetic fields and also pile driving. And these effects highlighted points of data gaps and also future research needs. 16 in-depth follow-up interviews gave respondents the opportunity to provide more detail about issues that most concern them. And through analysing these interviews, the most frequent topics or concerns spoken about were compensation, impacts from cables, potential solutions, ecological impacts, and displacement. And when we asked the fishermen about potential solutions, they provided a variety, which fell broadly into 3 categories. And these are financial solutions, such as regulated fair compensation schemes, including for permanently lost fishing ground, vessel decommissioning schemes, and indemnity for fishermen when fishing in or near the wind farms. Also design solutions such as co-designed turbine arrays to maximise fishing opportunities, deeper cable burial, use of suction buckets instead of pile driving, and creating seafood and offshore renewable working groups. And also some ecological solutions such as creating lobster hatcheries with community development funds or creating artificial reefs to benefit potting fisheries. So from the survey and also the solutions that have been proposed by the industry, we formulated a sort of list of policy recommendations that could help improve processes and outcomes in the future. So these include having a defined legal framework for interactions between offshore wind and commercial fishing, having regional working groups to work towards solutions, co-design of turbine and cable layouts, turbine arrays and cable layouts, statutory consultee status for fishermen, regulation, enforcement, and also importantly, monitoring of cable burial depth, regulation of electromagnetic fields in the marine environment, assessments prior to leasing for economics and ecological aspects, mechanisms for reporting and resolution of safety issues in and around the turbines, regulations of speed limits for vessels passing fishing gear, and also regulations for the timing of pile driving and seismic surveys to restrict activities during periods of spawning or migration of marine species. So how can fisheries and offshore wind coexist in our marine space? Well, what this work has highlighted is some key challenges are that impacts on commercial fishing will increase with the expansion of offshore wind and other objectives such as conservation or other industries. Impacts are being felt across fleet sectors and widely around the UK, although mobile gears can be more susceptible to impacts than static gears, and obviously the location of the wind farm is a factor. But whether wind farms are inshore or offshore, they will impact the fishing due to the ripple effect of displacement, and therefore the expansion of floating offshore wind is likely to increase the impacts highlighted here. Some opportunities are to translate recommendations and best practice guidelines, which can be ineffective, into legal policy frameworks, and also to increase collaborative working and design of new developments. And then just to share some final perspectives. So although this study reflects the views of a relatively small number of fishermen, it does highlight key concerns, and it's been echoed by other studies and reports that have been done. As offshore wind farm expands, impacts on the fishing fleet are inevitable and may lead to alteration in the composition of the fleet and in turn impact coastal communities. So there are multiple trade-offs that really need to be evaluated to work towards an environmental and socially acceptable transition to offshore renewable energy. Thank you.